Hi everyone, welcome back to True Stories with Andrea. I'm Andrea. I hope you're all doing well today. Anybody new who's just watching our page for the first time, we tell basically true stories, mostly true crime stories. Every now and then we'll throw in a true story that we find interesting, and we hope you do too. But for this story today, I want to give you a warning if you're sensitive to certain types of content that is difficult to watch. This is one of those stories. So having said that, we'll get into the story. This story begins on the evening of January 6th in 2007. A young couple who had just begun dating, and on this night they had planned to go out to dinner, and then they were going to a party at a friend's house. Their names were Shannon Kristen and Christopher Newsom. Chris was 23 years old. He had a lot of friends. He was described as a really great guy. He was an excellent baseball player. He was working as a carpenter, and most people loved him, and just an overall great guy. Shannon was 22 years old. She loved to play golf. She was quite good at it. She was attending the University of Tennessee and studying sociology. On this night, Shannon had gone to a friend's house to get ready for the party. They had decided that Chris would meet her there. As they finished getting ready, Shannon had told her friend to go ahead and go down to the party, and she was going to wait at the apartment for Chris to arrive. This was at approximately 8 p.m., and Shannon's friend went ahead and went down to the party as Shannon was still waiting for Chris to arrive. But soon as time went by and the couple never made it to the party, their friends became very concerned. They knew that they should have been there by now, and neither of them called to say that they weren't coming. Their friends began calling and texting the couple, but without any response, their worry intensified. At about 11 p.m., a couple of Chris's friends had gone to the apartment where Shannon had been getting ready. They were trying to find out where Chris and Shannon were. When they got there, they noticed that Chris's truck was still in the parking lot, but Shannon's SUV was not there. When Shannon's parents woke up on the morning of January 7th, her mother was very concerned because Shannon had never come home. Shannon was not answering the calls from her mother, which was definitely not like her. This is the point where her mother knew something was seriously wrong. Soon after that, Shannon's mother received a call that would just make matters so much worse. That really just intensified her worry. Her friend had said that Shannon and Chris had never showed up to the party. The friend also told her that Shannon's SUV was missing, so they had no idea where the couple was. Shannon was supposed to work on that Sunday. When she didn't show up for work, her manager called her mother, and the worry just continued to grow. It was very unusual for Shannon to miss a day of work, especially without calling. So this worried her family and her friends, as well as her co-workers. They were beginning to realize there was something seriously wrong. They knew something must have happened to Shannon and Chris. At that moment, Shannon's mom called 911 to report the couple missing. Unfortunately, because Chris and Shannon were both adults, the police had told Shannon's mom that there was nothing that they could do for at least 24 hours. With so much time gone by and they still hadn't heard from Shannon, they didn't want to wait 24 hours for the police to act. They wanted to take action right away, immediately, as most parents would. I know that I would. Nobody's going to wait 24 hours to act when they have a child missing. The first thing they did was contact her phone company. Luckily, the phone company was willing to help. The phone company was able to let Shannon's parents know that her phone had pinged on the Cherry Street phone tower. Cherry Street is in a really rough neighborhood. That's not an area where you would want to spend time. It's a very high crime area and not someplace that Shannon would go. Really, nobody goes there unless you live there or you're up to no good. Right away, all of Shannon's friends and family headed over to Cherry Street. They couldn't find any sign of Shannon, but they were able to find her SUV. Right away, they noticed some things that were definitely out of place. First of all, Shannon was known to keep her SUV immaculate. She cleaned it all the time. She liked a clean vehicle. The floors of the vehicle were covered in mud, and they also noticed that the seat had been pushed all the way back. It was pushed back too far for Shannon to be driving it. Shannon also kept photos of her friends and family in the vehicle, which were now missing, along with an iPad and a teddy bear. They also noticed cigarettes in the vehicle, and neither Shannon or Chris smoked. So that was alarming. Through searching the car, the police were able to find some fingerprint evidence. They got a hit on the fingerprints right away, which would lead them to a house at 2316 Chipman Street. This house was located only 2 blocks away from where Shannon's car was found. The hit on the fingerprints brought them to their first suspect, Lamarcus Davidson, a career criminal. So what started out to be a carjacking led into a much more disturbing outcome. I'm going to give you another warning now as we get further into this story. It gets much more disturbing. On this day, the 7th of January, Chris's body was found first. It was found near some railroad tracks by rail workers. His body had been wrapped in a comforter, and there was a sweatshirt wrapped around his head. He was gagged with his own socks, and his ankles were bound with his own belt, and his hands were secured behind his back. His bare feet were covered with mud. It was obvious that they had him walk to the place where they murdered him. Chris had several gunshot wounds that was consistent with an execution-style killing. He had also been doused with gasoline and set on fire. There was also semen found inside of Chris, but the DNA had been destroyed by the fire. Now let's go back to the beginning, when Shannon was at her friend's house getting ready for the party. Chris had been running a little late, but he did arrive to the apartment where Shannon was waiting for him to go to dinner before the party. But they were doing what all young people do, spending some time together, hanging around in the parking lot, kissing and hugging, and just showing affection. Like I said at the beginning of the story, they hadn't been dating very long. So this was a fairly new relationship. They were so into each other at the moment that they didn't realize that they were being watched. And they were being watched by a group of carjackers. They were enjoying each other's company so much that they didn't even see that they were being approached. And before they knew it, they were surrounded by this group of carjackers who had put guns to their heads. This was undoubtedly a very scary situation. I just can't even imagine. This is truly what nightmares are made of. And what would happen next is almost unfathomable. During the attempt of this carjacking, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. This frightened the carjackers, who quickly told Chris and Shannon just to get in the car. They told them at gunpoint to get inside Shannon's SUV. While the carjackers continued to keep their guns pointed at the couple, they quickly pulled out of the parking lot and they were driven to the house on Chipman Street. The house was located near a waste management and recycling plant. The 5 people involved in this crime was George Giovanni Thomas, Daniel Cobbins, Lamarcus Davidson, Vanessa Lynn Coleman, and Eric Boyd. Lamarcus Davidson had just gotten out of prison and was on parole for carjackings he had done in the past. The rest of them that were involved in this crime were staying in this house with him that he was renting. All 5 of these criminals were unstable and were always known to cause trouble. Lamarcus didn't have any money, and that frustrated him. So he was the one that decided that he was going to steal a car. So they established a plan to carjack somebody, and they set off into the night to do just that. That's when, unfortunately, they came across Chris and Shannon in the parking lot of the apartment complex. Chris was murdered first. He was raped and savagely beaten. They committed all of these atrocities right in front of Shannon. They wanted her to watch. After that, they walked Chris to the railroad tracks. This is where they would kill him. Davidson first urged Thomas to kill Chris. Thomas would obey this order, and he would shoot Chris first in the neck and then in the back. Now Chris was still alive, but he was paralyzed from the neck down, and he was still laying on the ground, unable to move at all. They wanted to prolong the suffering, so they walked a short distance away for a few minutes, when finally Davidson goes back and shoots Chris in the head. So now they've killed Chris after torturing him, but they're not done yet. They know Shannon is still in the house. They knew they had to get rid of the evidence, so therefore they tried to get rid of Chris's body. They wrapped it in a comforter and doused it with gasoline. Then they set it on fire. Well, these men had taken Chris out to the tracks to get rid of him. Shannon was left in the house with Vanessa. And when they returned to the house, they went into the room where Shannon was tied up, and they began to savagely beat and rape Shannon as well. These guys put Shannon and Chris through hell. Both of their bodies had been mutilated while they were still alive. The details of this torture is just too disturbing to share. The severity of their injuries before they were killed were extreme, and nobody should ever have to suffer like that. The attackers at this point then told Shannon that if she were to comply with them, that they would let her go. Vanessa was the only female that was complicit in this crime, and she was fully aware of what was happening to Shannon, and yet made no attempt to help her. This was through 24 hours of torture, and Vanessa didn't even have the heart to try and stop it. Vanessa did occasionally bring Shannon water, but she was alone in the house for a long enough time that she could have helped Shannon escape. This just goes to show that evil has no boundaries. After all of this, Shannon was strangled and beaten until she was no longer conscious, although she was still alive. They then tied Shannon up in a fetal position. Davidson, in an attempt to get rid of any DNA evidence, then poured bleach down her throat and inside her body. She was then wrapped in 5 garbage bags, and a white grocery bag was placed over her head. They then stuffed her into a trash can, put the lid on, and Shannon slowly suffocated to death. Her eyes were still open when she died. Soon after this, her body would be found. Now, going back to the investigation, when they found the fingerprints in Shannon's vehicle, they'd also found an envelope with DNA on it. This identification led the police right to 2316 Chipman Street on January the 9th. When they arrived to the house at this address, they found it to be unoccupied. So they began to search, and that's when they found the garbage can with Shannon's body in it. The large trash bags that she was wrapped in had Davidson's fingerprints all over them. And all of her possessions that had been missing from her car when the police found it were also found inside the house. Davidson's sperm was actually found on Shannon's jeans, and Cobbing's sperm was also found on her jeans as well as her sweater. Police found bullet casings that matched the gun that killed both Chris and Shannon. On January 11th, all 5 of these evil criminals were arrested and charged with the murders of Chris and Shannon. Vanessa and Eric Boyd were charged as accessories to the crime, but Coleman was arrested for murder. After the crimes, police found a journal inside the home. It said, "Last night was one of a kind. We stayed with a crackhead. That is cool as hell. It snowed a little bit, but it has already melted. Let's talk about adventures. I've had one hell of an adventure since I've been in on the big TN. It's a crazy world these days, but I love the fun adventures and the lessons I've learned. It's going to be a long, interesting year." The handwriting in the journal matched the handwriting of Vanessa Coleman. Eric Boyd was charged and convicted of being an accessory to a fatal carjacking. He's the only suspect not to be charged with murder. He was sentenced to a maximum of 18 years in a federal prison. Cobbins was charged with the murders and was sentenced to life in prison with no parole. Lamarcus Davidson was found guilty, and the jury decided that he should receive the death penalty. Even the judge had said this crime was the most incredibly outrageous, cruel, and inhumane case he'd ever seen. He also said how people can engage in this type of conduct is just unexplainable, and there is no punishment great enough for the conduct that you have been found guilty of. I agree with him. It's terrifying to me to think that there are people this evil in this world. The Supreme Court sentenced Davidson to death in 2016. George Thomas was found guilty on multiple counts, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Vanessa Coleman was acquitted for first-degree murder, but she was found guilty for other charges, and she was sentenced to 53 years in prison. And I don't think that's adequate, considering she could have saved Shannon's life if she wanted to. By the words in her diary, I believe she enjoyed what was happening. The waste management company that was near the home where these crimes happened bought the property and demolished the house. They turned it into a memorial to honor Chris and Shannon. So what do you guys think about this story? Do you guys feel the sentence for the killers was adequate? It's difficult to think that people could get such a thrill from torturing other human beings. It's heartbreaking. But let me know what you think. I definitely read as many of the comments as I can. It's hard, but we definitely try to read them all. So keep them coming. I love to read your opinions. We've opened up some new opportunities. Facebook has offered us some new opportunities. So if you like the videos that you see and you enjoy watching us, you have some other options now. You can send stars or you can subscribe, but this is totally optional. It doesn't cost you a penny to watch our videos, and we appreciate everybody watching. So stick around for the next video. So we look forward to seeing you, because we always want you to come back. And you guys know the drill. Don't forget to click follow, like, and share, and I will see you all next time.